Hello all and welcome, and I am the MGTOW philosopher. And in this video, I'd like to talk about cult figures, namely MGTOW cult figures, and cults that exist within MGTOW. Now, I made a video a while back on how MGTOW is not a cult, and I still hold firmly to that belief. Generally speaking, MGTOW isn't a cult, because it's not a group, nor does it have any codified belief system or dogma that members embrace without question. However, that said, there are different types of cults, and sadly, there is one type of cult that does exist within MGTOW, and that would be personality cults, and cults that can morph from a personality cult to an actual cult, or hover somewhere in between. By the way, neither are a good thing. Now, before we go any further, I believe in defining our terms so that we're all on the same page. So here is the brief definition of a personality cult via Merriam-Webster's dictionary. Excessive public admiration for or devotion to a famous person, especially but not limited to a political leader. For example, every pope became the center of a considerable personality cult. Now here's a very brief definition of a cult. A formal group with veneration, religious veneration or non-religious veneration, the key word being veneration. Of course, it's not limited to religion. A system of beliefs rigorously followed, be it a religion or no. Okay, that's a very brief definition of cults and personality cults, so let's discuss what I'm talking about specifically. Now, first of all, MGTOW believe in MGTOW, right? Wrong, because there's no such thing as MGTOW. MGTOW is just a word to define men going their own way, nothing more. Now, MGTOW men do believe in going their own way, but that's not a thing you believe in. It's just something a man is doing. Hence, it's more akin to a verb than a noun. And some men identify as MGTOW and some men do not. Just like some men identify as runners because they run. All runners are runners, but those who do not run are not runners, just as all men going their way are MGTOW. However, neither is a group or an ideology. And I suppose men do believe in MGTOW in the same way runners believe in running being good for their health. But that doesn't make running or MGTOW a group or an ideology. It's something you do. Get it? Good. However, what if you're not really going your own way, but instead you're going someone else's way? Are you still MGTOW? That's a question for another video, perhaps. Anyway, if you are going someone else's way and following another person with such fervor that you decide who you will and will not associate with based on the thoughts, whims, and feelings of that person you are following, doesn't that mean that you are more akin to a collectivist and a cultist than an individualist, a MGTOW, a cultist of a personality figure, but a cultist nonetheless? Now, let us talk about cult figures in general. With a cult, your devotion is ultimately to the leader and to the dogma he or she is pushing. Usually it's a he. He is worshipped and venerated by his followers. He's always right, no matter what, and his words are the gospel of the cult. If and when he dies, he'll continue to be venerated and his teachings followed. And if he, the leader, becomes angry with you, well, you're in trouble. You'll be shunned and perhaps even punished by your fellow cult members. If the cult leader dictates that you be cast out, well, you'll be cast out, and no other cult members will speak to you ever again. The word of the cult leader is law, and what he says goes. His followers will do all they can to please him, the leader, and they'll follow his lead in whatever he does. What he says goes, and his views inform his followers as to how they should act, as well as how they should view reality. You're loyal to him, the cult leader, beyond reason, meaning you don't stop to think about whether or not what he's doing, saying, or asking of you is right, wrong, sensible, senseless. You just take it at face value, and you run with it. Because after all, he's the authority figure, so he's always right. And you'd better listen too, because if you don't, there'll be punishment. And the punishment could be in the form of ridicule, shaming, mocking, or some other form of attack. It could come in the form of hazing, with other members of the cult used to attack you in some way. Essentially, they become proxy weapons and extensions of the cult leader's will. And in turn, they feel special and honored to be the extensions of the will of someone who's so great and powerful with so many followers. This also motivates them in their own time to go out of their way to act as proxy weapons whenever they can to please their leader and to further his and now their agenda. In the case of outsiders, those same proxy weapons can be used and employed in ways much the same as they could and would be employed against their fellow cult members who step out of line, such as using public shaming, ridicule, various forms of bullying, harassment, threats, and attempts to intimidate. As for the cult leader himself and his few close lieutenants, well, for them, all of this is about nothing more than money and power. Though they may seem like the most fervent believers, these so-called leaders of the movement, well, they're really just good actors whose one and only goal is to capitalize on the naivete and gullibility of their followers so as to make as much money as possible. And if these so-called cult leaders can glom onto an already popularized movement that already has adherents, well, so much the better. Makes their job that much easier. Such unscrupulous people can also convince themselves, at least to a certain extent, that they are also believers. They can also be total non-believers who see rubes that they can scam out of their money. It really doesn't matter which they are, because in the end, their main goal has nothing to do with leading anyone anywhere good. Though such people may tell themselves they're doing good, in most cases, their actions are nothing more than self-serving. Such people are, with both friends and enemies, utterly ruthless, have seemingly no conscience, and any act of kindness, decency, or altruism is in no way, shape, or form about being altruistic or kind or good to other people, and ultimately have only a self-serving motivation behind those actions. And it's not hard to identify such people. All you need to do is look at how hard they're trying to sell themselves as benevolent, self-sacrificing, altruistic, and kind. For you see, such individuals, they'll go out of their way to go on and on about how everything they do is for others. Yeah, right. Anytime they do anything for anyone else, they'll be sure to let you know how little they're benefiting and how much you're actually benefiting over them. They're getting nothing, so by implication, you owe them. In the end, all their so-called benevolence is about nothing more than consolidating power, gaining loyalty, and getting as many new followers as they can so as to further enrich themselves and cement their positions of power. Any of this starting to sound familiar yet? Yes, I'm sure it is. That's because MGTOW does have cults within its midst. Cults created by individuals who know that we as human beings have a want, nay, a need to belong to something greater than ourselves. Even men who are supposedly individuals. And it isn't so hard to capitalize on this want, nay, need that we all have. Just play to men's egos and tell them what they want to hear, and then you got them locked in. Speak bombastically and with great exaggeration. Speak in hyperbole. Play to their sense of aggrievement, their feelings that they've been wronged in some way. Play to their anger, their sense of disillusionment with the world. Pretend to be their friend and act as if you only have their best interests at heart. Give them a steady diet of ego-feeding sentiments that make them feel good about themselves. Addict them to the message you're giving until their sense of self and ego become entwined with the message itself. Now, this person has become an extension of you, the cult leader's will. Brilliant! You see, the dogma is the guiding principle for anyone in a cult. And dogma's easy. It makes life easy and simple. Because thinking for yourself, well, that's hard. And why do that when you can let others think for you, others who are wiser and smarter than you are? And the best part is you don't even know you've given away your agency and your self-determination to someone else. Now, let's take a look at the form cult initiation and transformation takes, shall we? Number 1, powerful and exclusive dedication, devotion to an explicit person or creed. For example, men going their own way. If used in concert with a personality figure who adds an ideology onto this, a so-called philosophy, then you have the making of a cult indeed. Number 2, the use of thought-form programs to integrate, socialize, persuade, and therefore control members. Right, creating parameters for what is and is not acceptable behavior, codifying the cult's beliefs into rules and regulations of a sort that should be followed if you want to be whatever the group is saying you will be if you follow these rules, and won't be if you don't. In this case, MGTOW. Number 3, a well-thought-out recruitment, selection, and socialization process. Right, spaces where hours upon hours are spent creating a friendly, welcoming social atmosphere where everyone feels like they belong. All the while, the dogma of the cult leaders is being fed to the members in the form of friendly, even jovial back and forth. Number 4, attempts to maintain psychological and physical dependency upon cult leaders. Right. This can be done in various ways. Public shaming of those who are and are not members of the cult, but in some way have acted in a way that doesn't fit the dogma of the leaders' particular view of what in this case is MGTOW. Mocking, shaming, ridiculing tactics, outright attacks designed to make those who listen and hear these attacks being done on others think twice before getting out of line themselves, while at the same time playing to their want, nay need, to have a strong and in-control leader representing them. Oh, look, here is our strong, great leader punishing those who are out of line, who are not in line with the party line. He's strong, and in turn I feel strong, and I feel like I belong. And I feel great when I'm in accordance with his wishes. Number 5, cults insist on reprogramming the way people see the world. This is part of why MGTOW men are susceptible to being duped by a personality figure and made into cultists. The person who's feeding them the so-called red pill knowledge can indeed open their eyes to the reality of things, but at the same time, that person can also introduce their own message in regards to how they perceive the world and react to reality. This gives the leader a great deal of power and control over the person he is supposedly awakening and red-pilling, because there is just enough truth mixed in to validate the so-called wisdom of the leader, who can then introduce bit by bit his own ideas as to how things. Number 6, consistent exploitation of cult members specifically to advance the leader's goals, meaning making money off the cult members and feeling powerful, both of which are by no means mutually exclusive. In fact, they more often than not seem to go hand in hand. You see, money and power love each other, and the more money you make, the more power you want, and vice versa. Because, of course, in terms of a cult, and in most areas of life, but especially as a cult figure, your ability to make money runs in concert with the amount of power you have, and the want of the members to make you happy. You know, cults are rather interesting in that they tear you down and then build you back up slowly over time. And once that happens, you are dependent on the approval of the cult leader and on the cult's dogma. Truly insidious, but a good way to make money. Number 7, cults nearly always go in for control signals. A different, unfamiliar setting with different rules, terms, behavior patterns. Yes, and we all know these control signals, don't we, as MGTOW men? Cuck, wimp, simp, pussy, mangina, white knight, arrogant, excessive ego, lacking in self-awareness. Anything that points to someone not being self-aware or going their own way or pandering to women. The pointing out of any of these things, it has real power among MGTOW men, real meaning. These control signals can also be co-opted and used for cult-building purposes. Sadly so. Number 8, ultimately using psychological and physical harm to cult members, their friends and relatives, and possibly the community as a whole. Now, while harm is nearly impossible if you're anonymous online, the psychological harm certainly isn't. As I pointed out before, cult leaders like to feel in charge, and they'll do any and everything they can to maintain their control. Whether that means going after others who seem to be a threat, or possible competition, or just someone who they don't like for whatever reason. The cult exists to serve their whims and wants, because it's an extension of their will. And because those people who follow the cult leader have chosen to give up their agency and tie their sense of self and ego to said leader, they'll do almost anything he asks without questioning, even taking the same joy and glee as him when attacking detractors or so-called enemies. This does not mean that these people are dominated absolutely. However, it does mean that within the environment of the group, that yes, they are. Now, I found this explanation of what cults offer, and it was very telling and very informative, so I thought I would include it to offer some context. So, what do cults, cult and non-cult, what do groups, both cult-like groups and non-cult-like groups, offer a potential recruit? Well, they offer friendship, identity, respect, and security. They also offer a worldview, a way of discerning right from wrong, good from bad. These are powerful incentives for all people, whatever their background. We are social animals, but they offer more. A structured lifestyle and the ability to acquire new skills. Through their very different ideologies, they also offer moral explanations into how the world works. They provide clear answers to difficult and big questions, what it all means, the secret of happiness, life after death, the difference between right and wrong, who is with us and who is against us, the saved and the damned. Now, some of you might get angry when I say this, but this sounds a lot like MGTOW. And that's because it is a lot like MGTOW. You see, MGTOW and MGTOW spaces offer a feeling of security and support, a sense of identity and mutual respect for other men who have gone their own way or who say they have. However, that's it. While this definition of what cults do for people does fit some of the things MGTOW gives men, it doesn't fit nearly all of them. Unless you're someone who has worked to turn MGTOW into a cult for your own personal gain. It's done by creating a so-called philosophy around MGTOW, a philosophy that you, the cult leader, are the originator and guru of. And being that person who is the originator means you are wise and all-knowing. And this is the first thing you need for a cult, an authority figure with an ideology. And what better way to peddle that ideology than to convince people that what they are learning is a philosophy instead? Yes, the philosophy of MGTOW. And no, ideology and philosophy are not the same thing. And just so you understand the differences better, here's a simple explanation of the differences between an ideology and a philosophy. I'd say that philosophy means something along the lines of the rational investigation of the truths and principles of being, knowledge, and or conduct. As such, it's a practice rather than a set of beliefs. An ideology, by comparison, would be a set of beliefs, a body of doctrine. In conclusion, here's a summary of the differences between philosophy and ideology. Number one, philosophy refers to a pragmatic approach of looking at and analyzing life. Ideology refers to a set of beliefs and rules belonging to a particular group or set of people. Number two, philosophy aims at understanding the world as it exists, whereas ideology is born out of a vision for the future and aims at changing the current state of affairs to that particular future vision. Number three, philosophy is objective, whereas ideology is dogmatic and refuses to participate in any discussion that does not agree with that ideology. Number four, philosophy does not have as much impact as an ideology would have on the world. For ideology aims at spreading the beliefs and imposing them on the rest of the society, irrespective of its relevance. Number five, all ideologies have some underlying philosophy, but it's not vice versa, meaning philosophies don't have an underlying ideology. Hence, if you are hearing ideology, you're not hearing philosophy. As for MGTOW, well, MGTOW is just a word, like bachelor. In fact, it's very near to being the same thing as a bachelor, if not the same thing. Of course, because some old world bachelors still might have bought women drinks or paid for some of their stuff. But they were lifelong single guys who didn't live with or have kids with women. However, being a bachelor is not a philosophy. The same goes for MGTOW. There are no MGTOW tenets or philosophies, and anyone who believes there are has to some extent been indoctrinated. Philosophy refers to looking at life in a pragmatic manner and attempting to understand why life is as it is and the principles governing it. In that sense, it's a tool for looking at and understanding the world we live in better. That's it. There are no affirmative actions involved in philosophy in terms of changing the world. There's no ideology, no dogma involved. In contrast, ideology is rigid and once fixed on certain beliefs, refuses to change its stance irrespective of any change in the surrounding environment. Challenging an ideologue, it can be a very difficult task. A philosopher, on the other hand, may arrive at some construct for the basis of life and other things, but will be willing to discuss and ponder other philosophies. A philosopher is open-minded and will listen to criticism, whereas an ideologue will refute anything challenging his or her ideology outright. This also suggests that while philosophy encourages people to think, ideology discourages. Hence, philosophy is merely a tool to help one view and analyze the world, while an ideology is a foundational set of beliefs that is never changing and unable to be challenged. This is why you can base a cult on an ideology, but not on a philosophy. I hope that clears up the differences between philosophy and ideology. So, all you need to start a cult, even a MGTOW cult, are a few simple things. First, a willing group of people. People who are open to the message you are peddling. Done! MGTOW men are ripe for the picking. They love the message that they are superior and not inferior to women as they have been taught for so many decades. By the way, we are superior. Check. A place to meet, interact with, and socialize with other men. A place where men can be taught the ideology while calling it a philosophy, even though it's anything but. A place that is a feel-good environment and welcomes all new recruits. Check. A firmly established ideology. Check. A charismatic leader to spread the message. We've got plenty of those. Check, check. That's it. That's all you really need to create a cult. And MGTOW has all the necessary puzzle pieces just waiting to be used by those unscrupulous enough to create their own MGTOW ideology and in turn a cult. And by the way, the majority of MGTOW are not cultists. Yes, a fair number are, but most are not. Now, at this point, some of you might be tempted to say, but MGTOW philosopher, there is a MGTOW philosophy because MGTOW teaches you to better yourself, become self-actualized, to see the world as it really is. It teaches you to seek the truth, that men are treated in a horrible way, and it gives you the answers you need to fight these injustices. No, that's not philosophy. That's an ideology. The teaching of certain things is a system of truth, and the taking of positive, affirmative actions that will result in solutions to said problems is an ideology. Philosophy is just a tool of the mind to better help people analyze and understand the world they live in. It has no underlying ideology. And yes, a regular MGTOW man knows that men are treated unfairly in the Western world and has chosen to take the action of walking away. But recognizing the game is rigged and choosing not to play isn't ideology. That's just you using logic and critical thinking to make a wise decision. The dangers come when you start attaching teachings, guidelines, and affirmative actions to MGTOW. That's when you start developing an ideology. And when you do that, you leave yourself wide open to all sorts of hucksters and fakes who can then use the ideology to manipulate you, because ideologies are set in stone and cannot change. Hence, you can't free yourself once you've tied your sense of self to those ideologies. Or if you can, it's very difficult to do so. And this is one of the dangers of taking any belief system too seriously. When people start attaching their view of reality to a set of beliefs that are dogmatic in nature. Beliefs which, when you become tied up, when you become tied to them, and your sense of self, ego, or id become tied to those beliefs to such an extent, therefore, anyone who can craft or manipulate an already existent ideology so as to make it more appealing to the mind and the ego of the person believing it can wield a great deal of power over those people. This is why I'm constantly saying that MGTOW is only men walking away from women. It's a definition of a thing. Like a tomato is the meaning of something that grows on a tomato plant. MGTOW is the word for a man going his own way. That's it. There's no ideology attached, nor is there any philosophy associated with it. The moment you try to attach both to something that is neither, The moment you make it into something that'll be nothing more than a dogmatic system that is ruled and governed by whoever is the most charismatic and feel-good person out there. I'm not sure all you out there will understand the concerns I've expressed here, because understanding the differences between ideology and philosophy and cults versus non-cults can be hard for some to grasp, especially since some of you out there might at this very moment be participating in a cult-like environment with a leader, lieutenants who backstop and enforce his wishes, and fellow members falling into the party line. It can be hard to have perspective on this subject when in such an environment. However, I urge you to try to think for yourself and see things without bias and the rose-colored glasses you may have come to see some people through. Trust me when I tell you this, there are MGTOW cult leaders in our midst, teaching ideology and calling it philosophy, saying that a set of established beliefs and teachings about what MGTOW is all about is somehow philosophy, and then hoping that you won't know the difference between that and ideology and that you'll just accept what they're saying at face value. These people, they are making you reliant on a set of beliefs instead of on yourself and your own faculties to inform you about reality. That's why cults love ideology. You have to be careful, people, and you have to be on guard. And by the way, you can be on guard and informed enough to protect yourself, because such MGTOW cults, like any other cult, are easy to spot once you know what to look for. Now, first off, there are no so-called MGTOW teachings. Hence, if someone starts talking about MGTOW teachings and tells you that this is what MGTOW is all about, that's a sure sign that you're dealing with an ideologue. Now, no, of course, not all ideologues are cultists, though all cultists are ideologues. That said, ideologues are generally bad and to be avoided anyway. Second, general intolerance to the thoughts, feelings, and ideas of others. This will be less evident in the MGTOW world, as most MGTOW share many of the same views by virtue of just being MGTOW, but those views are because of personal experience that many of us just happen to have in common by virtue of being MGTOW men, not because they're teachings from a book or being espoused by some on-high authority figure. This is where people make a mistake and tend to think MGTOW itself is a cult because of beliefs shared by many MGTOW men, because these shared beliefs can make it appear to be an ideology. That can also make it more difficult to spot cultists in our midst. Look for people who don't just say what they see, but give solutions to those problems as well. Often radical solutions that they then try to tie back into MGTOW itself, thereby trying to make those solutions a part of MGTOW. That's ideology. Be on the lookout for people who are seemingly a little too attached to a specific person, like a content producer, and their views. Such attachment can be mild, but moderate to severe attachment will be obvious and could point to someone who is following a cult figure. Be on the lookout for people who lash out at someone who says anything that is critical of the person they seem so attached to. Intolerance of... Also, be on the lookout for people who seem to be overly fond of a particular content producer. For example, always talking about them in glowing terms, or showing a great deal of reverence and hero-type worship for that person, or getting off on any type of association they might experience with their idol. These are all signs that you may be dealing with a cultist. Notice I say may, as singularly, none of these things are conclusive. Now, another thing to look for is someone knowing a bit too much about a certain content producer. For example, they seem to know every little thing this person does, right down to being able to identify when and where that person might have said a particular phrase. And this kind of follower is obsessed with the person they're following and is someone who possesses a cult-like mentality and may be a cultist. And I'm sure you know the type of person I'm talking about. The type of person whose hero can do no wrong. There's nothing that you or anybody else could say or do that would make the cultist stop listening to this person. The person they idolize could lie, cheat, steal, whatever. The cultists will always find an excuse, a way to rationalize their actions away so that they don't have to leave the cult that is this person's teachings, group, environment, because the authority figure, well, he's the heart of it all. And if he's bad, wrong, evil, then the system, ideology, group is bad as well. And finally, you want to keep an eye out for people who will do whatever is necessary to defend their idol or his view of things. They'll attack, shame, ridicule, swarm, troll, en masse, anyone who might threaten their ideology or their idol. No boundaries seem to exist for such people. They'll even preemptively strike if they perceive a possible future threat to the person they've clearly hitched their wagon to and are following when they act in this kind of way. And this being the internet, aggressive behavior can take any number of different forms, from posting in comment sections to attacking people without provocation in video form to encouraging your followers to attack someone by the example of your own actions or on direct instruction from you. And being that the internet is a bit different than the real world, the method of attack, well, it may change. But the reasons behind those methods, well, they never do. And for the ideologue, well, the ideologue must make sure that no one else can compete, co-opt, criticize, or in any way threaten their ideology. This type of behavior is very telling, by the way, and more than any other behavior is indicative of a cultist. Now, in some small ways, online cults are a little different than the real world type, but only insofar as how they operate, meaning the medium through which people interact and the aspects of that interaction that are unique to said medium. Otherwise, all cults share most of the same key attributes. Now, what follows here are some examples of those attributes. Number 1, the group displays excessively zealous and unquestioning commitment to its leader, whether he's alive or dead, regarding his belief system, ideology, and practices as the truth, as law. Number 2, questioning, doubt, and dissent are discouraged or even punished. Number 3, the leadership dictates, sometimes in great detail, how members should think, act, and feel. Number 4, the group is elitist, claiming a special, exalted status for itself, its leader, and members. For example, the group or leader is on a special mission to save humanity. Number 5, the group has a polarized us versus them mentality, which may cause conflict with the wider society. Number 6, the leader is not accountable to any authorities, unlike, for example, teachers, military commanders, or ministers, priests, monks, and rabbis of mainstream religious denominations. Number 7, the group teaches or implies that its supposedly exalted ends justify whatever means it deems necessary. This may result in members participating in behaviors or activities that would have considered reprehensible or unethical before joining the group. Number 8, the leadership induces feelings of shame and or guilt in order to influence and or control members. Often this is done through peer pressure and subtle forms of persuasion. Number 9, the group is preoccupied with bringing in new members. Number 10, the group is preoccupied with making money. Number 11, members are expected to devote inordinate amounts of time to the group and group-related activities. Number 12, members are encouraged or required to live or socialize only with other group members. Number 13, the most loyal members, i.e. the true believers, feel there can be no life outside the context of the group. They believe there's no other way to be and often fear reprisals to themselves or others if they leave or even consider leaving the group. And number 14, of course, not all of these key attributes apply to. So as you can see, MGTOW men are vulnerable to cult-like influence because of the views and experiences that MGTOW men tend to share. That's why MGTOW men in general need to be very careful not to become too invested in any set of beliefs that can then be codified into a so-called MGTOW belief system. Because once that happens, you'll have people who do and don't fit what is now considered to be the collective definition of what are and are not the right and proper beliefs of MGTOW. And if you don't fit those beliefs, then you're not MGTOW. Something that, by the way, is already happening right now within MGTOW ranks, with MGTOW cults popping up, claiming to have a so-called philosophy, which is their friendly word for an ideology, meaning a belief system that is dogmatic in nature and in no way a philosophy. You know, I like to talk about subjects related to MGTOW, and I like to talk about subjects that are interesting to me as a MGTOW man. But what I don't talk about is MGTOW subjects. Because there's no such thing as MGTOW subjects, as MGTOW isn't a thing that exists independently of the people who are doing it, meaning going their own way. That would be like talking about tomato subjects because they're subjects that happen to appeal to a tomato or are seemingly associated with tomatoes, so that makes them tomato subjects. Like talking about a hamburger and saying that's a tomato subject because a lot of people put tomatoes on their hamburgers. Y'all need to be very careful. So, my fellow MGTOW men, be wary. Be wary of people selling so-called MGTOW philosophies. They are doing so simply to hook you and sell you something. Be wary of people preaching MGTOW as a philosophy. Be wary of people telling you that this is what MGTOW teaches, or this is what it means to be MGTOW beyond simply going your own way. Such people are simply ideologues who want you to buy into their or someone else's teachings, teachings that have been codified into a system for the purpose of self-aggrandizement, profit, or both. MGTOW isn't a cult, but we do have some cult leaders within MGTOW who have capitalized on its recent growth in the hope of grasping some power and influence to enrich themselves financially. No question about that. MGTOW cults do exist online, people, and while MGTOW men by and large are not cultists, we still need to be very careful and make sure that as few such cults as possible are allowed to develop and thrive. That means always being on guard and being aware enough to know when you're seeing cult-like behavior. And so long as you can identify it when you see it, you can avoid it and remain a man in possession of his individuality and ability to think logically and reasonably. And I hope I've provided the necessary tools in this video for you to remain so, or become so again, if you've been unfortunate enough to become involved with such a cult. I am the MGTOW philosopher. Please like, subscribe, and donate to my Patreon if you feel so inclined. You'll find a link in the video's description. I wish you a good day. Take care.